On the day Claire thought her life would finally begin, it ended in front of 100 witnesses. A lace dress she stitched by hand. A mother's handkerchief wrapped in trembling fingers. A future she had rehearsed for years gone the moment her groom never appeared at the top of the aisle. People whispered. Chairs creaked. Her heart broke in a silence loud enough to shame the sky, and just as her knees were about to give out, a man she barely knew, a billionaire who avoided crowds, weddings, hope. He looked at her steadier than the altar she stood on and whispered the sentence that would rewrite everything she believed about abandonment, dignity, and second chances. If you need someone beside you today, pretend I'm the groom. Stay with Claire now, as the moment that saved her also changed her. The wind carried the late October chill across the hilltop, rattling the maple leaves like nervous hands. Their reds and golds caught the afternoon light flickering against the old barn that Claire had always dreamed of being married in. Warm strings of Edison bulbs swayed gently overhead, glowing like captured sunsets. Guests shifted in their folding white chairs, the lake stretching silver behind them. The scene was picture-perfect right up until it wasn't. Claire Dawson stood at the altar in a lace dress she'd sewn small alterations into herself because she trusted her hands more than any tailor's. In her right hand, she clutched her mother's handkerchief, the fabric worn soft by years and memory. She was breathing carefully, counting silently the way she taught anxious 8th graders to do in for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. Outwardly, she looked composed, almost serene. Inside, a quiet tremor was beginning to travel through her ribs. The music faded before it ever reached its swell. The violinist lowered her bow. A long moment stretched, then another. People turned. A few craned their necks toward the gravel path, where Mark should have appeared by now, handsome in his suit. Perhaps a little flushed, smiling that boyish smile she'd fallen for back when both of them were 19, and certain life was simple. But he wasn't there. The whispers started in the third row, low at first, then sharper. Maybe he's fixing his tie, someone murmured. He's late, that's all, another insisted, though the strain in her voice betrayed doubt. Then Lydia Hart, who never missed an opportunity to lace her sentences with poison, leaned toward her companion and said, just loud enough I knew he wasn't ready. That man's a runner. Claire felt the words like a shove between her shoulder blades. She held her chin steady anyway. The officiant, a gentle man with kind eyes, stepped closer and lowered his voice. Claire! He isn't answering his phone. Should we do? You want to step inside for a moment, Donna? Her stepmother stood from her seat, one hand covering her mouth, the other reaching out helplessly. Her eyes were filled with apology. She couldn't speak without breaking. Claire shook her head once. If she moved, she feared she might fall apart entirely. Her cheeks burned, her hands trembled inside the lace gloves. But her jaw locked with the stubborn dignity of someone who refused to collapse in public. Not here. Not in front of the entire town. The air grew heavy, almost too thick to swallow. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. A distant loon called from the lake as though to fill the terrible quiet. The officiant tried again, voice soft, Claire. Maybe we should ask guests to step inside while we... But he didn't finish, because from the far back row a man stood. Grant Ellison. The name moved through the crowd like a ripple. Some gasped. Some straightened reflexively like students caught by the strictest teacher in school. Grant, 6'2", impeccably dressed even in Vermont autumn, shoulders broad from years of labor before wealth softened none of him. The town's most intimidating success story. The boy who once stocked shelves at Dawson's Market and now controlled a national logistics empire from Boston. The billionaire who never came to local weddings. The widower who avoided public gatherings altogether. And yet he was here. More astonishingly, he was rising from his seat. Claire's vision blurred not from tears, but disbelief. She didn't know him beyond polite greetings at fundraisers and the occasional short conversation when he'd visited the school. Why was he? Grant stepped into the aisle and walked. Unhurried. Steady. Hands at his sides. His expression unreadable, but his gaze fixed on her with a quiet intensity that unsettled the air around them. Each step drew more whispers. What's he doing? Is he part of the ceremony? No, he wasn't invited, was he? Claire felt her stomach tighten, breath caught high in her chest. She wanted to run, to disappear into the barn's wooden beams, to wake up in another life where she wasn't being abandoned in public. But her legs refused to move. Grant reached the altar and stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could smell cedar and crisp autumn on his coat. He didn't touch her. He didn't intrude. He simply stood there, a calm pillar in the middle of a storm she could no longer control. His voice was low, meant for her, but the first row heard it too. "You don't deserve to stand here alone." Claire's breath shook as she whispered back, I can't move." Grant studied her face with surprising gentleness. No pity, no theatrics, just steady presence. Then he leaned in close enough that only she could hear the words that would replay in her mind for years to come. "If you need someone beside you today, pretend I'm the groom." The world seemed to stop. Every whisper died, every maple leaf stilled. The guests froze, all eyes, wide breath held. Claire stared at him, stunned, humiliated, grateful, terrified, relieved all at once. She didn't know what hurt more, that Mark hadn't shown up, or that someone else had. Her throat tightened. She shook her head a fraction, as though unsure if she'd heard correctly. Grant's eyes didn't waver. "I'm right here," he murmured. "You don't have to fall alone." And for the first time since the music had stopped, Claire felt her lungs expand. The handkerchief trembled in her fist, her heart hammered against her ribs, and the entire town, sitting beneath strings of warm lights and the burning colors of October, waited to see what she would do. She wasn't sure herself. The moment held fragile, breathless, on the edge of breaking. For a moment, no one breathed. The barn lights flickered softly, the lake behind them glimmered with late autumn light, and the silence grew so thick, Claire could almost hear her own pulse pounding in her ears. Then, like wind moving across tall grass, reactions rippled through the crowd. A gasp near the back. A sharp whisper from someone who had never liked her. A choked sound that might have been sympathy or curiosity. Claire's vision swam. Her throat tightened. She stared at Grant Ellison as though he were a hallucination conjured by humiliation and fading oxygen. "This is charity," she whispered. "I can't accept this." Grant didn't step closer. He didn't reach for her. He simply stood like an anchor in the storm, his voice low and steady. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said. "I'm asking you not to collapse alone." The words cut through her like cool water. Not pity, not rescue, just presence. Her gaze drifted past him toward the front row. Her father sat stiffly, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. His lower lip trembled the way it used to when he watched her fall off her bike as a kid and couldn't reach her in time. He blinked rapidly, and for the first time since she'd walked down the aisle, Claire saw the tears gathering in his eyes. Behind him, Donna pressed a fist against her chest, whispering a prayer or apology, maybe both. And then Claire remembered her mother's voice, soft but fierce, spoken years ago, over a sink full of dishes and a difficult day at school. "Don't you ever let someone make you feel small in public." She inhaled, shaky but deliberate. Grant's hand remained at his side, offered, not insisted. Claire swallowed hard. Then she nodded once and placed her hand in his. Someone murmured, "My God!" Another whispered, "She's stronger than I thought." Grant's grip was warm, firm, grounding. Nothing romantic, nothing presumptuous, just steadiness. They turned together to face the crowd. Grant's voice carried without effort, smooth and unwavering. "Plans have changed," he said, "but Claire remains the bride, and she deserves the respect you brought with you today." The words didn't rise in volume, but they filled the space, stitching the torn moment with something almost like dignity. Claire felt her spine straighten. She didn't smile. She didn't pretend she wasn't hurting, but she stood tall. The officiant stepped forward, still rattled, but trying to reclaim the afternoon. His voice wavered on the first syllable. "Everyone, perhaps we can, turn this moment into a celebration of community and courage. Life doesn't always follow a script, and today we can honor resilience even in unexpected forms." A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. A few guests nodded sympathetically. Others shifted, uncomfortable, but unable to look away from the shock, slowly transforming into something steadier. Grant didn't put an arm around her. He didn't play the part of a groom. He simply stood beside her, solid, silent, unwavering. The absence of forced affection made the moment strangely pure. Claire's breaths began to even out. Her fingers stopped trembling. The handkerchief in her left hand felt less like a lifeline and more like a reminder she was still here. When the officiant gently dismissed the guests toward the barn for an improvised gathering coffee-cider warmth, Claire and Grant remained at the altar a moment longer. She could feel every gaze on them, a mix of compassion, confusion, and stunned curiosity. Grant lowered his voice. "We'll walk together," he said, "just until you're steady." "I don't think I'll ever be steady again," she whispered. "You will," he said, "but you don't have to be today." Her breath caught not in pain this time, but in fragile relief. Then he offered his arm. Claire hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it. As they stepped forward, the wood planks beneath them creaked softly. The crisp breeze carried the scent of maple leaves, and the afternoon sun dipped just slightly like the world was bowing with them. Whispers rose again. Someone stifled a sob. Someone else fumbled with their phone. And then halfway down the aisle, a camera snapped. Claire turned instinctively toward the sound. A woman near the middle rows stood frozen, her phone raised, her expression equal parts apology and awe. Claire's face was pale, eyes wide with a kind of heartbreak that glowed raw beneath the surface. Grant's profile was calm, jaw set, expression unreadable, a man who looked like he'd just stepped into a fire without checking the temperature. Behind them, the aisle stretched empty, an image of absence and presence, of abandonment and unexpected strength, of a woman still standing and the stranger who chose to stand with her. A photo that by nightfall would ignite the entire internet. Claire didn't know that yet. She only felt her knees wobble again, her breath thinning as they approached the barn doors. Grant tightened his arm just slightly, not possessive, just supportive. "You're doing better than you think," he murmured. "No," Claire whispered back. "I'm just trying not to fall." "Then let me keep you upright a little longer," he said. She closed her eyes for a moment, clinging to the softness in his tone she hadn't expected from a man known to level boardrooms with a single look. The barn door creaked open. Warm light spilled out across their feet, and Claire inhaled, bracing for whatever waited inside, a crowd full of pity or kindness or something between. But for one suspended breath, standing on the threshold beside a man she barely knew, she felt something unfamiliar bloom beneath the grief, a flicker of safety. And just as she stepped forward, that feeling deepened. The barn smelled of cedar, warm bread, and the faint sweetness of cider that had been poured hours earlier when the day still held the shape of a wedding. Now guests drifted inside in uneasy clusters, whispering, glancing over shoulders, trying to decide whether to sit to leave or to simply pretend they weren't witnessing a heartbreak unravel in real time. The band, unsure what to do with themselves, tuned their instruments softly in a corner. A violinist plucked a string that echoed too loudly in the thick air. Claire sat at a small round table near the window. The late afternoon light poured across her dress, turning the lace into something almost translucent. She folded her mother's handkerchief on her lap, smoothing it without thinking the motion, giving her hands something to do besides tremble. Grant sat beside her, not looming, not stiff, just present a quiet shape of steadiness in a room that suddenly felt too large. Donna bustled over, eyes, red voice fluttering. "Honey, I'm so sorry, I should have noticed something was off. He wasn't himself this past week, but I thought it was nerves." "I should have," Mom Claire said, gently stopping her with a raised hand. "This isn't your fault." Donna's voice cracked. "But you shouldn't be going through this." Claire inhaled, willing her spine to stay straight. "And I'm not going to be the town tragedy today." "Okay," Donna blinked, swallowed hard, and nodded. She kissed Claire's temple and hurried off to intercept a group of guests who were whispering too loudly near the dessert table. Around the barn, small-town habits took over. People approached in hesitant waves. A cousin she barely saw anymore brought her a plate of sliced roast chicken. A retired neighbor touched her shoulder and muttered, "You look beautiful, sweetheart." That part didn't change. Two women Claire went to high school with hovered nearby, offering exaggerated compliments about the table runners, anything to avoid addressing the empty chair at the altar. And of course Lydia appeared. She sidled up with the energy of someone who had sprinted across the room to collect fresh gossip. "I can't even imagine," Lydia breathed dramatically. "What a shock. Weddings bring out people's true colors. I always said." Mark seemed. Grant shifted. He didn't move much, just angled his body slightly enough to force Lydia's gaze upward and away from Claire's face. "Miss Dawson needs space," he said quietly. Lydia froze, nodded too quickly, and backed away like someone escaping a snake. Claire released a shaky breath. "Thank you." "Just redirecting traffic," he murmured. But she felt it, his awareness of every pair of eyes, every conversation, every possible wound. A staff member approached, then a teenage caterer with nervous hands holding a tray of cider glasses. "Ma'am, Miss Dawson, can I offer you?" Her voice trailed off as she seemed to realize the drink she was offering might be the same one prepared for a toast that would never happen. Grant stepped in gently. "We'll take two," he said, relieving the girl of the tray before she could drop it. The teen's shoulders sagged with relief. She scurried back to the kitchen. Claire watched him for a moment, unsure what surprised her more, his presence or the way he softened it like someone learning the language of care in real time. He handed her a glass. She took it, fingers brushing his. "You didn't have to do that. You've had enough unkindness for one day." It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't a line. It was an observation, spoken in a tone that reached deeper than she expected. Trying to escape the weight of the moment, she asked, "Do you even like cider?" "No," he said. "But I like giving that girl a break." A breath of something like laughter fluttered from Claire before she could stop it. Silence settled between them, not awkward now, but curious. Grant studied the wooden beams overhead. "You work with kids, right? Troubled teens," she nodded. "Mostly kids who've been through things people pretend don't happen. I help them figure out how to re-enter school, reconnect with family, find some footing." She hesitated. "Most days I think they teach me more than I teach them." He considered that. "That tracks. What does that mean? You have that look." She raised an eyebrow. "What look? A person who learned compassion the hard way." Claire didn't have an answer for that. She glanced at him. "You grew up here. People forget that." He gave a small, almost reluctant smile. "Poor boy who stocked shelves at Miller's grocery. Every Tuesday and Friday after school. I must have bagged half the county's canned goods. I remember." "You do. You carried the apples like they were made of glass." She chuckled softly. "I used to think, that boy takes care with things other people drop without thinking." Grant looked down as if the compliment landed somewhere he wasn't prepared for. "Most people don't remember that version of me," he said. "I do." Another pause. Warmer now, less guarded. Then Grant spoke again, quieter. "I almost didn't come today." Claire blinked. "Why, I don't do weddings." "I figured." He looked toward the barn doors where guests milled uncertainly, careful not to look like they were staring. "But I remembered something," he said. "Your mother's funeral. Years ago." Her breath caught. "You spoke," he continued, "standing by that oak tree behind the church. You said grief is loudest in the room when everyone pretends not to hear it." Claire felt tears prick her eyes, not the humiliating kind, but the aching kind. "I didn't want to be that person today," he said. She stared at him, stunned by the gentleness in his admission, and then slowly, carefully, the corner of her mouth lifted. A small smile. Real. The first one, since the world collapsed around her. Grant didn't smile back exactly, but his shoulders lowered just slightly, like something inside him eased. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the barn siding. A few leaves skittered across the porch. Somewhere behind them, the band played a soft, hesitant melody, like a room trying to find its courage again. Claire looked down at her hands, then at the man beside her. She wasn't steady. Not yet, but for the first time that day she didn't feel like she was falling. And just as that fragile quiet settled between them, a shadow moved in the doorway, someone stepping inside with a look that promised more upheaval. The moment broke like glass. Morning came too fast. Claire woke to a soft October sun filtering through the curtains of her childhood bedroom, turning the quilt into a wash of pale gold. For one blissful second, half asleep, half floating, she forgot everything. Then her phone buzzed. Once, twice, then relentlessly, like a hive shaken awake. Her head throbbed before she even sat up. The events of yesterday, Mark's absence, the whispers, Grant's arm steadying her as the room spun, rushed back in a sickening wave. She reached for the phone with a trembling hand. 33 new messages. 20 missed calls. Her niece Ellie had sent a single line, "Aunt Claire, don't freak out. Just look." Below it, a link. Claire tapped it. Frozen on screen in her lace dress, pale as moonlight, eyes hollow, standing beside Grant Ellison, who looked as if he'd stepped out of a magazine. The empty aisle behind them stretched like a wound. The caption read, "Runaway groom leaves bride, local billionaire steps in." Her stomach dropped. Comments exploded beneath the photo like grenades. She must be loving the attention. No one gets a billionaire by accident. This feels staged. Poor girl, not poor. Calculated. Her throat tightened, heat rising behind her eyes. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, as if she could push the humiliation back inside. She wasn't on a stage yesterday. She wasn't performing. She was breaking. And now the world was watching the replay. Footsteps approached the door. Her father, piqued in concern, etched into the lines of his face. "Morning, sweetheart," he said softly. "I made coffee." Claire tried to smile, but her lips barely moved. "Dad." "It's everywhere." He sighed, sitting beside her on the bed. "People talk. They always have. And they'll move on." "Will they?" she whispered. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her principal. She hesitated, then answered. "Claire," he began gently, "parents have seen the video. Some are concerned about distractions. Perhaps you should take a few days off." She closed her eyes. Distraction. As if she'd chosen this. As if heartbreak made her unfit to help the kids she cared about most. As if she were the scandal, not the abandoned woman simply trying to stand up again. "Of course," she murmured. "I understand." When she hung up, she stared at the phone like it was something that might bite her again. Her father touched her shoulder. "You don't deserve this." "No," she whispered. "But it's happening anyway." A quiet knock sounded at the front door. Her father stood. "That'll be him." "Him," he called ahead, her father said. "Said he wanted to check on you." Claire's breath caught. Grant. She didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. The thought of him seeing that viral photo her at her weakest made her cheeks burn. But then again, he'd already seen her at the altar. She wrapped a sweater around her shoulders and followed her father to the living room. Grant Ellison stood by the front window, hands in the pockets of a dark coat, hair slightly wind-tossed from the cold morning air. He looked out of place in the small, cozy room, but not uncomfortable. More like he was studying the space with respect. His eyes softened when he saw her. "Morning, Claire." She tried to speak, but shame clogged her throat. She gestured helplessly toward her phone. "You saw it," she said. "I did." His voice didn't carry pity, only truth. "It's everywhere." She sank onto the couch. I can't go through this again. Yesterday was bad enough. Now strangers think I staged my own humiliation." Grant sat across from her, leaning forward. "They're going to make up a story, whether we speak or not," he said. "That's how the internet works. I'm not built for this kind of attention." "No one is," he replied. "Not really." She looked away, blinking fast. "I don't want my students seeing this. I don't want my coworkers whispering. I don't want people thinking I—" She stopped, voice breaking. "That you asked for it," Grant finished softly. She nodded. He exhaled slowly, hands clasped. "Claire, listen. We can't change the fact that a photo went viral. But we do have some control. Over what?" she whispered bitterly. "People have already written their version." "Yes," he said. "But they'll rewrite it if we give them a better one." She looked up. He continued carefully, deliberately, as if choosing each word with precision. "Let me stand beside you for a little while," he said. "Publicly." Claire blinked. "Grant, no, that'll just make it worse." Or he countered, "It'll give context. Stability. A narrative that isn't built on humiliation." She shook her head. "I don't want to fake anything. We don't call it love," he said. "Or romance. Or some whirlwind story. We call it respect. Two people choosing to handle a mess together instead of letting the internet turn it into a circus." Claire's heartbeat thudded in her ears. "I don't want you to feel obligated," she whispered. "This isn't obligation," Grant said. It's choice. I don't want you dragged into this. You're not dragging me anywhere. I walked into that barn on my own. She closed her eyes. This is too much, she said softly. I know. It feels like losing control of my life. Yes, he said quietly, but this way you take some back. She opened her eyes, meeting his. For the first time since the photo appeared, she felt something other than humiliation. A possibility. A sliver of agency. A path, messy, frightening, but hers to choose. She didn't answer. Not yet, but the seed had taken root. Grant stood, smoothing his coat. I'll give you time, he said. But not too much. The internet moves fast. He walked to the door, paused, and turned back. Claire. His voice softened. You're not alone, unless you choose to be. Then he stepped outside into the cold morning light, leaving the door open just long enough for a gust of wind to chase after him. Claire wrapped her sweater tighter around her shoulders. Not alone, unless she chose to be, and for the first time that morning, she didn't know what she would choose. Claire had forgotten how loud the old farmhouse clock was in the mornings. It ticked with the steady patience of something that had survived decades of storms, emotional and otherwise. Now, sitting at her father's kitchen table with a chipped ceramic mug warming her hands, she tried to borrow some steadiness from it. Across from her, Grant Ellison sat with the posture of someone who didn't quite know how to make himself small in a modest kitchen. The space smelled of coffee and toast, as if trying to pretend nothing in the world had changed overnight. Claire's father shuffled between them, filling Grant's mug, then hers, then sitting down slowly, as though preparing for a conversation bigger than any of them had planned for. Grant wrapped both hands around his coffee but didn't drink. His gaze was steady, thoughtful. Before we start, he said, I want to make something clear. None of this, he gestured slightly vaguely toward the world outside, is something you asked for. And I'm not here to complicate your life further. Claire lifted an eyebrow. Funny. Yesterday felt pretty complicated already. He nodded once. Which is why we should talk like adults and figure out how to make things. Her father snorted quietly into his mug. That's the first sensible thing I've heard since dawn. Grant placed a folder on the table, not formal, not heavy, but still Grant-like, organized, intentional. I drew up a plan, he said, not a contract, just possibilities. Claire's stomach tightened. Possibilities for what? For how to take back some control. She didn't respond, but her father leaned back, arms crossing, listening. Grant continued, voice calm, but softer than she'd ever heard it. The internet is already writing its version of yesterday. They'll keep going. We can either correct the direction or let them decide who you are. Claire bristled. I don't want to lie to people. Good, he said. Neither do I. He opened the folder, not with the snap of a businessman, but with the care of someone handling fragile glass. Here's what I propose, he said. We make a public statement that you've agreed to help me with several local philanthropic programs, youth development, mental health projects, things we both believe in. She blinked. That's it, that's the truth, he replied. We've talked about your work. You care deeply about those kids. I respect that, he continued. We'll attend a few events together, calm the media, give people something grounded to talk about. Claire felt her cheeks warm. The idea of being photographed beside him on purpose made her pulse jump. And what about us, she asked quietly. There is no us, Grant said, not unkindly. Not in the romantic sense. Not in the story people are spinning. Her father exhaled a breath he'd been holding. Grant went on, all we say publicly is that we choose to stand together for now. Out of respect. Out of decency. Nothing more. Claire studied him. That sounds like a very polished version of damage control. It is, he said. With truth at the center, she folded her arms. And what do you get out of this, Grant? Because I don't want to become your project. His eyes softened, not defensively, but with a kind of tired honesty. You're not my project, he said. You're a person who was humiliated in a very public way for something she didn't do. And I know what it feels like to have a crowd assume the worst. That landed harder than she expected. Her father's voice entered the quiet. I don't like the internet knowing my daughter's heartbreak, he said. But I do like seeing somebody stand up with her. Claire looked at him sharply. Dad, he held up a hand. I'm not saying you owe him anything. I'm saying I've never once seen Mark show up for you like that boy did yesterday. Boy. Claire almost smiled. Grant at 46 was hardly a boy, but she understood the point. She turned back to Grant. His face was unreadable, but she could feel the sincerity behind his stillness. I don't want pity, she murmured. I'm not offering pity, he replied. I'm offering structure. Protection. A chance to breathe while the internet rushes to its next obsession. She stared down at her mug, noticing the faint crack near the rim her mother had glued years ago. Okay, she said finally. Let's say we do this. Hypothetically. Grant didn't move, didn't push. And let's say we stand together at these events, and people make assumptions. She looked up. Where does it stop? When you say so, he answered without hesitation. Her father nodded, satisfied. Claire inhaled slowly. The farmhouse clock ticked 2 more beats. Then she whispered, yes. The word filled the small kitchen, soft but decisive. Grant's shoulders eased, not triumph, not relief, exactly, but something human. But Claire added, lifting a finger, I have a condition. He nodded. Go on. If this ever starts to feel like a performance instead of a choice, she said, I'm out. Immediately. Grant didn't even pause. Agreed. That more than anything made her chest loosen. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He accepted her boundary like it was the only sensible rule in the room. She studied him for a moment longer, unsure what she was looking for. Maybe a hint of his motives, maybe a crack in the armor, maybe something that told her why this man who avoided weddings, avoided small talk, avoided any whisper of vulnerability, had stepped into the wreckage of her life without flinching. He held her gaze, quiet and steady, and in that moment something shifted so slight it might have been imagined. Not trust. Not yet. But the beginning of something that could grow in the space between 2 people choosing to stand upright after a storm. They weren't partners, not lovers, not a fairy tale, just 2 grown-ups making an agreement in a kitchen where the clock kept time like it had seen everything before. You'll let me know when you're ready, Grant asked. Claire nodded. I will. He stood, buttoned his coat, and offered a small, respectful nod to her father. When the door closed behind him, Claire exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her father sipped his coffee and gave her a sideways look. He's steady, he said simply. Claire stared at the empty chair across from her. I don't know what he is, she whispered. Not yet. But her heart beat differently now, strange, cautious, curious. And somewhere deep inside a question began to take shape, one she wasn't ready to speak aloud. The Civic Center looked smaller than Claire remembered. Maybe it was because she hadn't been here since she was 19, handing out raffle tickets at a summer bake sale. Or maybe it was because tonight every person in that building felt larger than life, each one armed with a phone, a whisper, a curiosity she wasn't ready to meet. A week had passed since the wedding, that wasn't. A week of headlines, speculation, blurry photos of her at the grocery store, her at the mailbox, her pretending not to see someone filming from across the street. And now here she was stepping out of her father's old pickup truck in a simple navy dress that fell just below her knees. No professional makeup, no dramatic reinvention. She chose the dress because it was comfortable, and tonight she needed comfort more than glamour. Grant was already waiting by the entrance. For all his tailored elegance, he looked almost familiar. The boy who used to stock shelves, the young man who learned to outrun shame, the hometown son who made it big but still remembered the way autumn smelled in this part of Maine. You look steady, he said quietly. I'm not, Claire replied. I know, he said, but you look it. The doors opened and the wave hit instantly. Whispers, gasps, the soft chorus of chairs scraping as heads turned, and the unmistakable glow of phones rising like a forest of small intrusive suns. Claire felt sweat pool between her shoulder blades. Her stomach tightened, her breath shortening. Grant noticed. Without saying a word, he placed his hand lightly at the small of her back, not claiming, not guiding, just grounding. A gesture that said, breathe. I'm here. Tell me about your students, he murmured. She blinked. What? your students. The twins who never stop arguing, the boy who wants to be a firefighter, the girl who writes poetry on gum wrappers. His tone was normal, unaffected. Like this was any ordinary night. Claire exhaled slowly, the tension loosening one knot at a time. You remembered all of that, you told me, he said simply. I pay attention. The MC, a nervous man in a bow tie, far too small for his neck, tapped the microphone. Tonight, he began, we're honored to have, well, unexpected guests of honor with us, Claire Dawson and Grant Ellison. People clapped. Some sincerely. Some because it was the polite thing to do. Some because they wanted the video to look good. Claire stared at her plate. Her fork trembled slightly. Grant leaned in. Do you want to leave? No, she whispered. I want to stop shaking. You will, he said. Give it a few minutes. Dinner passed in a blur of cautious glances and whispered speculations. A few brave souls approached to comment on the silent auction items or the weather small talk designed to pretend they weren't thinking about the viral photo that brought her here. Claire nodded, smiled politely, kept breathing. Then during dessert, an apple crisp that tasted more like cinnamon air than actual apples. A woman approached their table. She was in her 70s, silver hair pinned back in soft curls, her shawl a faded rose color that matched her lipstick. Her hands trembled slightly as she rested them on the edge of the table. Miss Dawson, she asked. Claire stood instinctively.
Yes, ma'am.
The woman's smile was small, gentle, but her eyes carried weight, years of it. I hope you don't mind me saying something personal, the woman said. Claire braced herself. Go ahead. My husband left me in 1978, she said plainly. Walked out 2 hours before our ceremony. Told his brother he wasn't ready. I never talked about it, not once. I pretended it didn't break me, and I carried that silence for 40 years. Claire's breath stilled. The woman continued, voice steady but soft. When I saw you standing there last week, not running, not hiding, I wished I'd had even half your courage, half your spine. You didn't crumble, you stood. And I want to thank you for that. Something inside, Claire cracked not painfully but like ice breaking to let the river move again. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely holding. The older woman reached out, squeezed her hand gently and nodded as if passing her a torch Claire didn't know she had earned. Then she walked away quietly, gracefully, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and a truth Claire hadn't expected to meet tonight. She sat down slowly, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in days. Validation, not pity, not mockery, not scrutiny, but recognition. Grant watched her quietly. That, he said after a moment, is why we're doing this. Claire looked up, still absorbing the moment. Doing what? He nodded subtly toward the crowd, the phones, the whispers, the eyes that saw but didn't understand. Not for them, he said. Not for the noise. For people like her, the ones who've carried something alone for too long. Outside, the autumn wind pushed golden leaves across the dimly lit parking lot, swirling them into small constellations. The world felt quieter than before, still heavy, still complicated, but no longer crushing. She wasn't a punchline. She wasn't a spectacle. She wasn't the abandoned bride. She was someone's mirror, someone's courage, someone's reminder that standing still could be its own kind of defiance. And as she watched her reflection faintly in the glass, Grant blurred beside her, not looming, not claiming, just present, she felt the edges of herself shift. Maybe she hadn't made a mistake coming tonight. Maybe this was where her story began to rewrite itself. But just as that thought settled, a shadow crossed her reflection, someone approaching someone who didn't walk like a stranger. Claire's breath hitched. The night, it seemed, wasn't done with her yet. The night air was colder than Claire expected when she stepped out of Grant's car. The porch light flickered against the autumn dark, casting long shadows across the untrimmed hedges. It should have felt like home, familiar, steady, but something in the air felt off. She sensed it before she saw him. A figure sat hunched on the front steps, elbows on his knees, suit jacket draped over one arm like a defeated flag. His hair was mussed, his tie missing, and he looked smaller than she remembered, as though someone had drained a piece of him since last week. Mark. Her breath stalled. He stood quickly when he realized she was there, brushing off his pants, as if that could erase whatever story had written itself across him. Claire. His voice cracked on her name. She didn't move. What are you doing here? He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting away like a man searching for courage in the dark. I needed to see you. I've been sitting here a while. I didn't want to scare your dad by knocking. Gas station coffee drifted from him. Regret, too. The kind that settles into a person's posture and makes them fold inward. Claire swallowed, keeping her distance. You shouldn't be here, Mark. I know. He took a breath, but I had to explain. She crossed her arms, partly from the cold, partly to keep herself from shaking. Explain what he exhaled shakily. What happened at the wedding? Her chest tightened. The words alone made her ribs feel smaller. Mark stepped closer, but not too close, maybe realizing boundaries now existed where none had before. I panicked, he said. I woke up that morning and saw you. Saw us. Saw this life happening all at once. And something in me just... His fingers twitched helplessly. Snapped. I couldn't breathe. Claire felt the ache of old memories stirring. The nights he'd withdrawn without explanation. The mornings he'd apologized without naming the problem. The pattern she'd ignored because she believed love meant patience. He kept going. I kept picturing you walking down the aisle, he whispered. And instead of feeling lucky, I felt like I was being crushed. Like I wasn't enough. Like I was going to ruin your life because I couldn't be who you needed me to be. Claire blinked against the sting in her eyes. So you left, I ran, he corrected softly. Because running felt easier than staying and disappointing you. She let out a laugh, not cruel but wounded. You don't think disappearing at the altar disappointed me, I know. His voice shook. God, Claire, I know. And when I saw the video, when I saw you standing there with Grant. He hesitated, hands tightening at his sides. You looked like you didn't need me at all. Claire froze. She hadn't expected that. Not jealousy, not bitterness, fear. The fear of being replaced, overshadowed, forgotten. But it was the wrong fear. Mark, she said quietly, that moment wasn't strength. It was survival. He looked down, ashamed. She continued, You're seeing what you want to see, not what happened. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I'm asking for another chance, he said softly. I messed up. I know that. But I love you, Claire. I always have. And I swear to God I'll show up this time. No running, no panic. Just us, if you'll let me try. Her heartbeat thudded painfully. She stared at him, the man she'd imagined forever, with the man she'd defended 1,000 times, the man who broke her open without even watching her shatter. Inside, her two forces collided, the old ache and the new anger, the woman she had been at the altar and the woman she was becoming. She stepped back, needing space. He noticed, and something in him wilted. Claire, he whispered, please say something. She looked at the porch, railing the chipped paint, the shape of her childhood home against the dark sky. And then she spoke, not with anger, not with softness, but with truth. I don't even know who I was at that altar, she said. Everything happened so fast. I was hurt, humiliated, terrified. And I don't know the version of me you're asking to love you again. His eyes reddened. I'm not asking for the altar version. I'm asking for you. That's the thing, Mark. Her voice steadied. I don't know who I am right now. Not yet. And I need to figure that out without you before I can answer anything. Silence blanketed the steps. Mark nodded slowly, heartbreak tightening his jaw. Okay. His voice was barely audible.
Okay.
I'll give you that space. I owe you that much. Claire nodded once. He hesitated, then held out her grandmother's locket, the one she'd given him to hold before the ceremony. I kept this safe, he whispered. I wasn't trying to. I didn't mean to lose everything. She took it from him, fingers brushing his. For a moment, a single thin thread of a moment, the past flickered. Then it faded. You should go, Mark, she said gently. He stepped back, eyes glistening. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Just not tonight. Goodbye, Mark. He nodded, turned, and walked down the driveway, slow, shoulders low, like the world had finally caught up to him. Claire stepped inside the house and closed the door softly. The click of the latch felt final, like the closing of a chapter. But only halfway. She leaned against the door, her breath shaky, the locket warm in her palm. Outside, Mark's footsteps faded into the night. Inside, her heart beat unevenly, uncertain, shifting, becoming something new. And somewhere deep inside her chest, a question began to rise, one she feared and craved in equal measure. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday morning. A regional TV station wanted to feature Claire and Grant in a short segment about resilience, community, and the unexpected ways people show up for each other. Claire stared at the email, stomach tightening. She didn't want to become a public symbol. She didn't want her pain polished into something inspirational. She didn't want to sit under bright studio lights, answering questions that made her relive the worst moment of her life. When Grant arrived at her father's house later that afternoon, she handed him her phone. "I don't think I can do this," she said. Grant read the invitation quietly, then set the phone on the table. His expression stayed steady, no persuasion, no strategy. "Then we don't go," he said simply. He slid his hands into his coat pockets. "Your life isn't a product, Claire. You don't owe the internet a speech. If you'd rather stay home and read to your kids at school, do that. I'll respect it." She blinked. "You're not going to push me, not my call to make," he said. "Your story is yours." Her breath softened. He didn't say you should do it. He didn't say it'll help the narrative. He didn't even say I think it's a good idea. He just stepped back, giving her space to choose. That more than anything made her want to say yes. "I'll go," she said quietly. "But I'm doing it for me." He nodded once like he'd expected nothing else. The station was small, half newsroom, half storage closet with posters curling at the edges. Still, it buzzed with the particular energy of a place trying to convince itself it mattered. Studio lights glowed soft and warm, much gentler than Claire feared. She smoothed her dress, the same navy one from the charity dinner, and touched the old handkerchief folded neatly in her lap. Habit. Anchor. Grant stood beside her during the mic check. He didn't hover, didn't instruct, didn't touch her. But every few minutes, she'd catch him watching her with a quiet steadiness that helped her breathe. The host, a woman with kind eyes and a stack of cue cards, took her seat and smiled. "Claire, thank you for being here," she began once cameras rolled. "I think everyone watching wants to understand something very human about last week. So let me ask you plainly." She leaned forward. "What did it feel like standing at the altar when he didn't come?" The studio fell still. Claire inhaled. Her fingers pinched the edge of the handkerchief. She expected she'd talk about anger, or betrayal, or humiliation. But the words that rose were different. "It felt empty," she said softly, "like the world was watching to see if I'd break. And I almost did." The host nodded gently. "What kept you standing? A breath, a memory. A man walking down an aisle he wasn't supposed to walk." Claire looked down at her hands, then continued. "Somebody decided I shouldn't have to break alone," she said. Her voice didn't quiver, but something inside her shifted. "He didn't pretend to be my groom. He didn't pretend to be in love with me. He just stood there, steady, like he believed I deserved to stay upright." Almost unconsciously, she glanced toward Grant. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't nod, but something softened in his face, as though hearing her say it aloud reached a place he usually kept bolted shut. The host shuffled her cards, then asked the question everyone online had been waiting for. "Are the two of you a couple?" Grant inhaled, ready to answer, but Claire spoke first. "We're two people who chose to stand up together on a hard day," she said. "Whatever grows from that, we'll let it be real. Or not at all." The host blinked, visibly struck by the honesty. Not a PR line, not a denial, not an admission, just truth, soft, unvarnished, brave. The cameras stayed silent, capturing the moment where Claire reclaimed the story, not the internet's version, not a narrative someone crafted for her, but something alive and unpolished. The interview wrapped with warm handshakes and promises of airing the segment on Friday, but Claire hardly heard any of it. Her heartbeat had shifted tempo. Faster but lighter. When they stepped outside into the cool late afternoon air, Grant walked beside her, not in front, not behind. "You did well," he said quietly. "I didn't say anything special." "You said something real," he corrected. "That matters more." They walked a few slow steps toward the parking lot. Did it bother you? Claire asked suddenly. What I said. About us, not pretending anything, no, Grant said. Then after a beat, it was the part I hoped you'd say. Her breath caught, but she didn't ask why. Not yet. A breeze rustled the last stubborn leaves clinging to the maples overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train hummed low and steady. Grant unlocked the car and opened the passenger door for her. Not performative. Not practiced. Just natural. But before she stepped inside, Claire paused. Grant looked at her, waiting. She didn't know what she wanted to say. Only that, something about today, about speaking her truth, about the honesty they'd shared on camera, had shifted the ground between them. Not a leap, not a fall, just a tilt. A beginning that wasn't trying to be one. She swallowed, uncertain. Grant? She said quietly. He lifted his eyes to hers, steady, patient, unreadable. The words stayed lodged in her throat. Not yet, not tonight. They'd wait. She stepped into the car, the door closing with a soft click that echoed louder in her chest than she wanted to admit. The first snowfall of December dusted Burlington like powdered sugar, lining the edges of roofs and street lamps, as if the whole town had dressed up for the evening. Inside the newly renovated Lakeshore Hotel, the annual Winter Horizons Gala shimmered in warm gold light. It was Grant Ellison's cornerstone event for his foundation. The night donors expected polish, influence, and a perfectly curated narrative. Claire adjusted the deep green dress Donna had loaned her, smoothing the satin skirt as she and Grant stepped into the ballroom. The dress hugged her shoulders gently, giving her a kind of quiet confidence she didn't expect. Grant offered his arm, steady as always, and this time she took it without hesitation. You don't have to stay glued to my side, he murmured as they crossed the marble floor. I know, she said. Maybe I want to. He didn't smile fully, but something softened in his eyes. Enough to warm the space between them. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers imported from Vienna, each crystal catching the light like falling stars. Local press hovered near the entrance, pretending not to stalk their every step. Donors whispered behind champagne glasses, pausing mid-sentence whenever Claire passed. And then there was Lydia. She wore a sequined navy gown sharp enough to slice through glass, her smile too bright, too rehearsed. She flitted from table to table, whispering like a woman dying to be quoted. More than once, Claire caught her casting a look equal parts envy and fascination. Don't let her bother you, Grant murmured. She doesn't bother me, Claire said. But she definitely enjoys pretending she knows the whole story. Grant's eyebrow twitched. Then she'll be disappointed tonight. The evening flowed with polite conversation, introductions, speeches about literacy and community outreach. Claire found her footing, slowly greeting strangers who already knew her name. She didn't shrink, didn't apologize. She simply existed in the room without flinching, and that alone felt like a victory. But near the midpoint of the night, the air changed. It was subtle at first, movement near the ballroom entrance, a ripple of heads turning, phones lifting, whispers spreading like smoke. Claire followed the shift, her heart dropping before she even saw him. Mark. He stood beneath the archway in a rented tux that didn't quite fit, shoulders sagging, smile trembling at the edges. His hair was combed neatly, but his eyes carried exhaustion, the kind born from regret and something dangerously close to hope. Grant stiffened beside her, not aggressively, just alert. Mark spotted them instantly and moved through the crowd with single-minded determination. Claire felt her pulse tick faster, her fingers tightening around her clutch. He reached her at the edge of the ballroom, where the light dipped into softer shadow. Cameras angled discreetly. Conversations quieted. Even the band's melody wavered. Claire Mark breathed as if he had sprinted the last mile. I needed to see you. She took half a step back. Why are you here? His voice cracked. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I messed up in a way I can't take back unless you give me the chance. Messed up, Claire repeated softly. You left me at the altar, Mark. That's not messing up, that's disappearing. He swallowed. I panicked. I saw you walking toward me in my head and thought I wasn't enough. I thought I'd ruin your life. Then I saw the video online, you with him. He flicked a glance at Grant, bitterness flickering in his eyes. And you looked like you didn't need me at all. Grant remained silent, but his posture shifted subtly as if shielding her without stepping forward. This isn't about needing someone, Claire said, her voice tightening. It's about who shows up. Mark's desperation sharpened. I'm showing up now. I'm here, aren't I, after the damage, she whispered. Not during. The room fell quieter, sensing the moment. Mark's voice rose too loudly, too publicly. Are you really choosing him? The rich guy who swooped in. Claire, come on, everyone knows he's. Grant's jaw tensed, but he stayed silent. The band faltered mid-note. Donors watched openly now. Cameras hovered with shameless hunger. Claire felt her breath catch, not from fear, but from clarity. Something inside her broke open, not painfully, but like a window, finally letting in air. She turned, walked toward the bandstand, and before anyone could stop her, took the microphone. Conversation died. Grant's eyes widened, not with concern, but with a trust that hit her deeper than she was prepared for. Claire faced the crowd, people who had watched her humiliation in grainy viral videos, people who had debated her life like it was entertainment. This isn't a competition between two men, she said, voice steady, clear. Not tonight. Not ever. Every gaze locked on her. This is about who shows up when it matters. She turned to Mark. You ran when it mattered. He didn't. A hush swept the room so complete it felt sacred. Claire reached into her clutch, pulled out the engagement ring she'd been meaning to return, and pressed it into Mark's trembling hand. Not with vengeance. Not to shame him, but to finally close the door she'd been trying to keep half open. I wish you well, she said quietly, but I can't go backward. Mark swallowed hard, his face pale beneath the ballroom lights. Then she turned, not dramatically, not with flourish, and walked back across the ballroom floor. Grant didn't reach for her, didn't motion, didn't claim, but when she stepped beside him, she did it entirely on her own. A choice, not a rescue. And the whole room saw it. The music resumed softly, but something different pulsed underneath, something electric, the shift of a story rewriting itself. Claire exhaled her hand, brushing the edge of Grant's sleeve. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. By mid-morning, the snow outside had shifted to a soft, steady flurry, gentle enough to feel like decoration, quiet enough to feel like warning. Claire heard the knock on the front door while she was still in her father's flannel shirt and slippers, clutching a mug of tea she hadn't bothered to sweeten. Only one person knocked that way. 3 taps, pause, 2 more. Megan. Claire opened the door to find her older sister standing there with her coat, half-open scarf, crooked hair windblown, and a pie tin balanced under one arm. I brought blueberry, Megan said, because you look like someone who forgot how to eat. You haven't seen me yet. I could hear it in your footsteps. Claire rolled her eyes, stepped aside, and let her sister inside. For all her brashness, Megan smelled like cinnamon and home. She kicked off her boots and made a straight line for the kitchen table, claiming the same chair she always did, the one their mother used to sit in. Claire followed slowly. All right, Megan said, sliding the pie toward her. Start talking. About what? Megan raised a single eyebrow. That eyebrow had interrogated boyfriends, employers, landlords, and once a dentist. Claire, sweetheart, why? The entire country saw you hand a man back his engagement ring under a chandelier, and then walk straight to another man like you'd known where your feet were supposed to go all along. So, yes, start talking. Claire dropped into the chair across from her. Megan, I don't need an intervention. Oh, honey. Megan reached for the pie server. This isn't an intervention. This is reconnaissance. Claire lifted her mug. Great. They sat in a pocket of quiet, not the awkward kind, but the kind woven out of years of knowing each other's wounds. The farmhouse clock ticked above them, steady, old, familiar. So Megan said finally, Are you in love with him, or just grateful he showed up? Claire froze. It was the one question she'd been outrunning since the day everything fell apart, and then began impossibly to rearrange itself. She stared at the steam rising from her mug, at the scratches on the old kitchen table, at the place where her mother once spilled candle wax, and pretended it added character. I hate that question, Claire whispered. I know, Megan said gently. That's why I'm asking it. Claire let out a humorless laugh. You really haven't changed. Neither have you, Megan replied, softer this time. You still try to process everything by yourself. Dad worries. I worry. Even the dog probably worries. We don't have a dog. My point exactly. Claire shook her head, but Megan's expression didn't budge, equal parts fierce and tender. They ate pie in silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that only sisters could translate. You remember when Mom was sick, Megan said suddenly. Claire looked up. Of course, you remember what she said about Dad, that loyalty isn't loud. It's just showing up again and again, even when you're exhausted or scared. I remember. Megan leaned in. Does Grant show up? Claire swallowed. Yes, and Mark. Claire stared at the wood grain in the table until it blurred. He showed up late, and only because he hated how it looked. Megan nodded as if confirming something she already suspected. And how do you feel when you're in the same room as Grant? Claire didn't answer. Is it quiet? Megan asked. Is it easy? Claire felt her eyes sting. It's not easy, but it feels steady, like something I didn't realize I was starving for. Megan reached across the table and took her hand, the rare gesture that Claire never took lightly. You're scared, Megan said. Claire nodded. Terrified. Why? Because I don't want to turn my heartbreak into another performance, and I don't want him to think I'm clinging to him just because he saved me from falling apart in front of 100 people. Are you? No, Claire whispered. That's the problem. I don't think this is gratitude anymore. Megan waited. Claire drew a breath that felt too big for her chest. I don't know when it happened, she said carefully, but I stopped pretending this was just for show. She blinked, tears catching at the corners. I look for him in every room now. The words hung in the air, fragile, newfound, unbelievably true. Megan's expression shifted, still protective, but now threaded with something softer. Relief. Understanding. Maybe even hope. Oh, Claire, she whispered. Then don't let this become half true. Not with him, and definitely not with yourself. Claire looked down at their joined hands, her heartbeat uneven but no longer frantic. What if he doesn't feel the same? She asked. Megan gave her a look so direct it almost hurt. Men don't show up the way he has unless they feel something. And if they do and he doesn't, then at least you lived honestly. Claire let out a slow, shaky breath. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, relentless, like the world was being rebuilt one flake at a time. Inside, Claire felt something similar happening in her chest. Not certainty, but clarity, the beginning of truth. She didn't know what she would tell Grant yet, or how, but she knew one thing: the pretending part was over. A soft knock sounded from the front of the house, hesitant, familiar. Claire stiffened. Megan glanced at her. Expecting someone, Claire shook her head. But the look in Megan's eyes said she already knew, and she wasn't wrong. Claire didn't see the email at first. She had spent the morning grading spelling quizzes at the dining table, the scent of leftover blueberry pie still hanging in the air. Megan had left an hour earlier with a fierce hug and a warning: don't let fear make your choices. You've already done enough of that for one lifetime. Claire wasn't sure what she was choosing yet, but the words had settled into her chest like a seed. By mid-afternoon, she opened her laptop to send a message to a parent, and that's when she saw it. A subject line so plain it almost vanished among the newsletters and school updates. I know. Her pulse tightened. She clicked. The message was short. Too short. I know your partnership with Ellison started as a PR move. Wonder what your students' parents will say when they hear it was all fake. Below that, a row of attached images, screenshots. Her stomach twisted. They were early text exchanges between her and Grant's PR director. Hannah notes about managing the narrative, about how to avoid sensational headlines. Nothing salacious, nothing deceitful, but taken out of context. They looked exactly the way a stranger would want them to look: calculated, theatrical, manipulative. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. She recognized her own words. Recognized her desperation, her fear, her willingness to let someone take the lead because she didn't know how to breathe under the weight of public humiliation. She slammed the laptop shut as if the message could reach out and touch her. For a long time, she just sat there listening to the old house creak around her, the whisper of the heater kicking on the distant groan of a truck climbing the hill outside. She thought she had run out of ways to feel exposed. She was wrong. When Grant arrived 20 minutes later, he didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside with the urgency of someone who had just been told the building might be on fire. Hannah forwarded the email to me, he said, voice low, controlled, in a way that told her he was anything but. Are you all right? No, she whispered. He gently pushed the laptop back open and scanned the message again, jaw tightening. When he reached the screenshots, the muscle in his cheek twitched. My team is already tracing the IP, he said. Someone inside the foundation might be involved, but it could also be a vendor, a donor's assistant, a journalist. Claire interrupted. I can't become another story people fight over. You won't, he said firmly. I'll handle this. We can run a counter-statement, preempt with a different narrative. Claire shook her head, hard, pressing her palms into her eyes. I'm so tired of narratives. He inhaled slowly, visibly wrestling with the instinct to protect her by taking complete control. Let me fix this, he said. Please. Claire looked up at him, really looked. This was the man everyone called calculating, impenetrable, icy. But she saw the storm under the surface, the fear of losing control, the fear of failing someone who had already been failed too publicly, too painfully. I know you want to protect me, Claire said softly, but this isn't just a PR problem. It's my life. His expression flickered, hurt, restraint, respect. What do you want to do? He asked. She didn't answer right away. She put on her coat, grabbed a scarf, and stepped outside. Grant followed but didn't speak as she walked down the snowy driveway toward the lake trail, the same path she had walked as a teenager when she needed clarity. The same place her mother used to say the world felt honest. The air was sharp and clean, the lake half frozen at the edges. Claire walked until the tension in her chest finally cracked open. I'm tired of hiding, she whispered. Grant stood quietly beside her, his breath a faint cloud in the winter air. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. Every time something hard happens, people rush to control the story. My stepmother, my coworkers, the internet, your team, even me. But running from the truth just makes me smaller. And I can't be small anymore. He listened, not interrupting. I don't want another edited version of my life, she continued. Not after everything that's happened. Her eyes stung as she turned to him. So, if there's going to be a story, I want it to be all of it. The mess, the mistakes, and the part where something real showed up in the middle of it. Grant's breath caught. Not dramatically, just enough that she felt it. Claire, he said slowly, as though choosing each word carefully. If you speak, there will be fallout. People may twist it. Some may say this confirms their suspicions. I know. He looked at her with a kind of awe mixed with something else, something deeper, something he'd been holding back for weeks. After a long moment, he nodded. Then I won't stand in front of you, he said quietly. I'll stand beside you. Again. Something in her loosened, a knot she hadn't known was tightening. She exhaled shakily. Thank you. Grant hesitated. Claire, this is brave. But you don't have to carry it alone. I know, she whispered. That's the first time in a long while I've been able to say that. Snow continued to fall softly around them, quieting the world, until it felt like the two of them existed on a single breath. Claire looked back toward the house, toward the laptop, the inbox, the storm gathering online. She wasn't ready. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Not of the truth. Not of standing up, and not of what might happen. When she and Grant faced the world together, it was Megan who first said the words out loud. You don't need a camera. You need a room full of real people. Claire didn't answer at the time, but the idea followed her all week, whispering at the edges of her mind, tugging at something deeper than fear. By Thursday night, she found herself sitting in front of the community center, director asking for a microphone at the upcoming town hall on online harassment and public accountability. The director blinked. Claire, are you sure? No, she said truthfully. But I think it's time. On the evening of the meeting, snow dusted the parking lot in a thin layer, the kind that made the pavement glow under the street lamps. People filed inside the aging community center, parents clutching coats, teenagers whispering, older residents settling into folding chairs with the familiar creak of metal legs on linoleum. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't televised. It was the same room where her mother once led PTA meetings and her father had volunteered for pancake breakfasts. Grant arrived quietly and slipped into the second row, not beside her, not behind her, but where she could see him if she needed to. She did. Her pulse thrummed. She stood backstage, fingers brushing the fraying edge of her mother's handkerchief tucked into her pocket. The cotton steadied her breathing, her heartbeat, her courage. The moderator introduced the evening's program, then gestured for Claire to step forward. She did. Her heels echoed too loudly on the wooden stage. Her palms were damp. She could feel the gaze of every person in that room, curiosity, pity, judgment, maybe some compassion. "Hi," she began, her voice smaller than she wanted. "I'm Claire Dawson." A ripple of recognition spread through the room. "And some of you know me because of a moment I never wanted to be public." She inhaled, slow and deliberate. A few gasps. A few nods. Some eyes softened. "I didn't know how to breathe in that moment," she continued. "I didn't know how to stand in front of 100 people and pretend I wasn't collapsing." She swallowed hard. "And so, someone stood with me." A glance toward the second row, brief, instinctive. Grant didn't move, but the steadiness in his expression warmed her spine. When the video went online, Claire said, "I became a punchline to strangers. People who didn't know anything about my life still had opinions about how I should feel, how quickly I should get back up, whether I deserved what happened." She paused, scanning the faces. "And I did something I'm not proud of. I hid behind an arrangement, a partnership partly for protection. What started as a way to survive the storm turned into something the internet could twist." In the back row, Lydia crossed her arms dramatically. Claire didn't look away. "Yes," Claire said clearly. "The partnership between Grant and me began as a way to manage the public fallout." Soft murmurs filled the room. Some sympathetic, some curious, but her voice steadied. "Something honest grew inside what started as a strategy, and I won't pretend that didn't happen." She let the silence breathe. "I'm not here to ask for sympathy. I'm here because the online world turned a painful moment into entertainment. I let fear shape my choices. I let shame keep me from telling the truth." She stepped closer to the edge of the stage, her voice lowering but somehow carrying more weight. "I want to say something plainly, not online, not through a headline, but to real people." Another breath. "I'm not the woman who got left at the altar. I'm the woman who learned she wasn't broken, even when the world watched her fall." For a heartbeat, the room was a held breath. Then a single pair of hands clapped, then another, then a few more. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't unanimous, but it grew steady, warm, real. Some people nodded with damp eyes. Some whispered to spouses. A teenager in the third row lifted her chin as if suddenly feeling less alone. Even the moderator blinked away something tender. Lydia stood abruptly, scoffed under her breath, and marched out. A few heads turned, but no one followed. Claire's shoulders relaxed just slightly. When the applause faded, she closed with a simple line: "Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me as more than a headline." She stepped back from the microphone, heart-pounding vision blurring at the edges with the unexpected sweetness of relief. She didn't fall apart. She didn't hide. She stood, and for the first time in months, the ground beneath her felt like her own again. As she walked down from the stage, Grant rose from the second row. He didn't rush toward her. He didn't take her hand. He simply stood there, letting her see the pride in his eyes, quiet, deep, unmistakable. She exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. But the night wasn't over yet. At the far end of the room, a reporter in a gray coat raised her camera, and Claire sensed dimly that the truth she'd finally spoken was about to ripple far wider than this room. By February, the noise had quieted. The news cycle had found new chaos to feed on. The memes faded into archived timelines, replaced by weather updates and small-town gossip. For the first time in months, Claire woke to a life that felt to hers again. It was on one of these quiet mornings that Grant called. "I want to show you something," he said. "What is it?" There was a pause, not hesitant but deliberate. "A place I haven't shared with anyone in a long time." She could hear something in his voice, a softness rarely unguarded, and she felt it inside herself too, a tug towards something she wasn't afraid to name anymore. The cabin sat at the far end of Ellison Lake, tucked between two cedar trees, grown crooked by decades of winter gusts. The wood was weathered, the porch railing crooked, the chimney leaning like it had given up on staying straight. But it was beautiful. The kind of place where silence deepened, not hollowed. "My parents built it when I was 12, Grant said as he unlocked the old door. "After my wife passed, I came here once and couldn't make myself return." Claire stepped inside gently, as if the cabin itself carried a memory she shouldn't disturb too abruptly. The interior smelled of pine and old summers. A faded quilt lay draped over a small couch. A pair of boots sat by the door untouched for years. "Why now?" she asked softly. "Because I'm not grieving alone anymore," he answered. The honesty of it pressed warm against her ribs. They spent the afternoon cooking in the narrow kitchen, a kitchen barely wider than a hallway. They bumped shoulders reaching for the salt. Claire burned the toast. Grant dropped the spatula. They ended up laughing over a pot of soup that tasted far better than it looked. No cameras. No whispers. No storyline someone could twist. Just two people learning the shape of ordinary together. When the sun began to slip behind the trees, they carried blankets out to the porch steps. The lake shimmered in shades of violet and deepening blue. A pair of ducks drifted toward the reeds. Somewhere nearby, ice shifted with a soft crack. Claire tugged her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "This is the quietest my life has been in a long time," she murmured. "I know," Grant said. "I wanted you to have that." She studied him, the way the fading light softened the hard edges of his face, the way his hands rested loosely between his knees, the way he wasn't reaching for her but wasn't pulling away. "What do you want life to look like?" he asked, if no one on the internet cared anymore. Claire smiled faintly. "Breakfasts that aren't rushed. Kids who don't think I'm fragile. A home where the only noise is the kind you choose." He nodded. "Sounds like peace. And you?" she asked. He hesitated only a moment. "Someone to come home to," he said quietly. "Not because I rescued her, not because she needs me, because she wants to sit on a porch like this and share burnt toast with me." Claire laughed softly. "I can promise the burnt toast." Grant's gaze deepened, warm, steady, unhurried. The kind of gaze a man gives only when he has reached a decision that's been living in his chest for a long time. He shifted slightly, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a small box. It wasn't velvet, it wasn't polished. It was simple wood edges worn smooth, something personal, something real. He didn't kneel. He didn't orchestrate a scene. He just held the box between them, resting on his palm like an offering. "Claire," he said, voice low, "I didn't step up at your wedding to start a story. I stepped up because I couldn't watch you stand alone." Her breath caught not from surprise, but from something like recognition. "I'm asking now," he continued, "if you'd let me be the man who stands with you on purpose. No cameras, no arrangements, no performance. Just us." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, silver, understated, elegant. Not chosen for spectacle, but for sincerity. Claire didn't reach for it. She looked at him, really looked, and felt everything she'd been holding back rise up like a tide. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of choosing wrong again. Afraid of trusting the wrong man. Afraid of building something that falls apart when life gets loud again." "I know," he said softly. "Fear doesn't disqualify you." She swallowed. "I don't want a marriage made from gratitude. And I don't want to be a replacement for a life you lost," he replied. The honesty between them felt like stepping into warm water, disorienting but cleansing. Claire drew a long breath. "You didn't rescue me," she said. "You stayed. After the cameras, after the gossip, after the story ended, you were still there." Grant's chest lifted with a slow inhale. "Is that your answer?" he asked quietly. She nodded, not rushed, not swept, but grounded. "Yes, then stronger, yes, Grant. Not because you saved me, because you stayed." His eyes closed for a moment, as if the weight he'd been carrying finally loosened. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, the world didn't erupt. There were no fireworks, no applause, no clicking shutters. Just the soft rustle of pine branches, the murmur of the lake, the warmth of his hand against hers. Ordinary, uncomplicated, perfect. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let out a long breath, resting his cheek on her hair. For the first time in her life, Claire understood what it meant for love, to be quiet, not fragile, not uncertain, but deeply, profoundly sure. But inside that quiet one, truth pulsed steadily. The world might not be done with them yet. Summer arrived with a kind of gentleness Claire hadn't felt in years. Warm wind, soft sunlight, the smell of cut grass drifting through her father's backyard, the same yard where she once chased fireflies, where her mother hung bedsheets that billowed like sails. Today it held folding chairs, a few mason jars of wildflowers, and a narrow wooden arch Grant had built himself. No designer barn, no curated photo wall, no crowd hungry for a story. Just the people who mattered. Claire smoothed the skirt of her simple dress, fingers brushing the inside seam where her mother's handkerchief had been stitched into the lining. Hidden but present. Like a blessing tucked close to her heart, Donna fussed with Claire's hair until Claire swatted her away with a laugh. Megan pinned a pearl at her collarbone. Her father kissed her temple and whispered, "No rush, kiddo. Walk out there when you're ready." He had said the same words when teaching her to ride a bike. And then the music began, not a dramatic processional, just a soft guitar melody played by an old family friend. Claire stepped out into sunlight that filtered through maple leaves, dusting the air with shifting flecks of gold. She inhaled deeply, letting the warmth settle into her bones. Grant stood beneath the arch, hands clasped loosely in front of him, wearing a simple gray suit. No tie, no bravado. His ring, a plain silver band, caught the light each time his fingers shifted. When he looked at her, his expression softened into something so full, so steady, it made her heart stutter. She walked toward him. Not toward an audience, not toward a performance. The officiant was the same man from the disastrous first wedding, kind eyes, gentle voice, carrying a binder that looked older than the both of them combined. He greeted her with a smile, already misted at the edges. "Claire," he said quietly, "it's an honor to stand here again. Some stories do need a second chapter." The officiant welcomed everyone, spoke briefly about resilience, about honest love, about showing up for one another when life grows heavy. No theatrics, no over-rehearsed prose. Then he nodded to Claire. She felt the breeze cool the back of her neck as she lifted her gaze to Grant. His eyes held both devotion and patience, the kind a man carried when he wasn't afraid of silence. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "You didn't promise to fix me," Claire said. "You didn't promise a perfect ending. You just refused to leave, even when you had every reason to step back. I choose you because of that. Because love isn't the grand gesture, it's the quiet staying." Grant swallowed hard, his chest rising slowly. The officiant nodded for him to speak. Grant took a breath, his voice low and warm. "You taught me that showing up once isn't enough. That love isn't about rescue or headlines, or being the one who steps in during a crisis." His hand tightened gently around hers. "I choose you every day we wake up in the same ordinary life, even on the days that aren't beautiful. Especially those days." The backyard grew still, as if listening. A robin landed on the porch rail. Someone sniffled in the second row. Megan dabbed her eyes with the edge of a napkin she pretended was not being used as a tissue. The officiant lifted his hands, smiling fully now. "By the power entrusted to me, I pronounce you husband and wife." There was no roar of applause, just warm clapping, soft laughter, a sense of rightness drifting through the air like pollen. Grant leaned forward and kissed her, not long, not theatrical, but deeply real. The kind of kiss that felt like stepping into a home she hadn't known she'd been searching for. The guests mingled in the yard afterward, sipping lemonade and picking at a table of homemade dishes. Donna insisted on preparing herself. Children ran between chairs. Someone played old songs on a portable speaker. There was no spotlight, no pressure, no expectation. Just life. Quiet and unvarnished. Later, as dusk settled and the last guests drifted away, Claire and Grant sat together on the porch, swing blankets around their shoulders, her head resting on his. Fireflies blinked between the trees. The scent of honeysuckle rose with the wind. Claire let out a long, peaceful sigh. This time she whispered, "I wasn't left standing." Grant turned his head slightly, resting his cheek against her hair. And this time he murmured, "Neither was I." The swing creaked gently beneath them. The world beyond the yard kept turning loud, unpredictable, demanding stories. But the world here in this moment grew wonderfully quiet. This was the ending the internet would never notice, the one built not from spectacle but from healing. from choosing each other long after the cameras stopped watching. And it was enough. More than enough. Fade out, but only from the noise. Their real story was just beginning. Sometimes healing begins where we least expect it. Not in a perfect moment, but in the middle of a day that breaks our hearts in front of everyone. Claire thought her life ended at that altar. What hurt most wasn't just being left, it was being watched while it happened. Many of us know that feeling in some form, the divorce. Everyone heard about the job, we lost the child who walked away, the private pain that somehow became public. But her story reminds us of something quiet and powerful. We are not defined by the people who walk away, but by the ones who choose to stay. And by the way, we choose ourselves when the dust settles. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives as a steady presence, a hand that doesn't let go when the room gets silent and uncomfortable. And maybe that's the gentle invitation for us to forgive the version of ourselves who stood there shaking, to honor the strength it took to keep standing, and to believe that a softer, truer chapter can still begin, even after the worst day of our lives. Thank you for spending this time with us, and for letting this story settle gently in your heart. Your presence here truly matters. Every kind comment, every moment you choose to listen, reminds us that compassion still has a place in this world, especially for those carrying quiet burdens. And if this story touched you, even in a small way, every like, share, and subscribe helps us tell more stories that heal, soften, and speak to the soul. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing kindness. And thank you for helping us keep these stories alive. We'll see you in the next one with another journey of grace, courage, and the light we find in each other.